That night began like a storm I never saw coming. A night that would rip through everything I had built with years of sacrifice and patience. My son stood in front of me, his voice sharp and cold, telling me to leave my own home because his fiancée didn't feel comfortable with me around. The same home I had helped build, stone by stone, memory by memory, sacrifice by sacrifice. His eyes didn't hold the warmth I once saw when he was a boy. Instead, they carried a kind of distance, like he was speaking to a stranger. My heart trembled as he repeated himself, louder this time. "Get out, Mom. She doesn't want you here anymore." I looked around the living room, the room where I once decorated the Christmas tree with him, where he used to curl up beside me with storybooks, where I held him when he cried after nightmares. Now those memories watched me quietly as if they too were helpless. His fiancée stood behind him, arms crossed, watching me with a look that held no respect, no gratitude, no shame, only entitlement. She treated my presence like an inconvenience, like a stain on the life she wanted. I wanted to speak, to remind him of the years I had worked double shifts as a single mother, the nights I went hungry so he could eat, the dreams I gave up so he could chase his. But the words sat stuck in my throat like ice. Instead, I watched him, my son, asking me to leave without a trace of hesitation. Tears pressed behind my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. Not in front of them. I quietly went to my small corner and picked up the few things I owned. A couple of clothes, my scarf, a framed photo of him as a child, smiling, loving, innocent, and the little crochet cloth I had embroidered during long nights when I felt lonely. As I held that cloth, memories of younger, softer years flooded me, and for a moment I wondered where that boy had gone, the boy who once said, "Mom, I will always protect you." But people change, and sometimes they change into someone you no longer recognize. When I stepped out into the cold night, the air cut against my skin like a blade. The sky was dark, and the town lights flickered faintly in the distance. I had nowhere to go. No family close by. No friend waiting for me. Just a suitcase, a scarf, and a heart that felt heavier than the winter around me. I walked slowly down the street, the crunch of snow beneath my boots echoing in the empty night. Each step felt like leaving behind another piece of my life. My hands were shaking from the cold, but the cold didn't hurt as much as the words he had said. I never imagined the child I raised with so much love would one day push me into the night like a burden. As I reached the end of the street, I turned around once, not to look at the house, but to look at the life I was leaving behind. The windows glowed warmly, but there was no warmth inside for me. I whispered to myself, "You survived harder nights than this," and kept walking. The night was long, the road empty, and the silence felt endless. But somewhere deep inside, beneath the pain, a small spark of strength flickered. A spark that whispered that this was not the end of my story, only the beginning of a new one. As I walked further into the night, the cold grew harsher, settling into my bones like an unwelcome truth I could no longer escape. My feet ached, but turning back was no longer an option, not after the way he had looked at me, as if I were nothing more than a burden he was finally ready to discard. I found a small bench near the bus stop and sat down, clutching my scarf tightly around my shoulders. The streetlights flickered above me, casting long shadows that seemed to whisper every moment of my life I had tried so hard to hold together. The quietness around me was broken only by the distant hum of passing cars, each one a reminder that life continued for everyone else while mine had collapsed in a single night. I wondered if he even realized what he had done or if he had simply gone back inside, comforted by the warmth of his fiancée's approval. Perhaps she was already celebrating her small victory, clearing me out of the way like an old piece of furniture she no longer wanted in her perfect little life. The bitterness stung, but beneath it lay something deeper. A heartbeat of grief that pulsed with every memory of raising him alone, of shielding him from the world, of loving him enough to forget my own needs. The snow began to fall, soft at first, then heavier, coating my hair and shoulders in white. I watched it accumulate on my suitcase, on my boots, on the empty road stretching endlessly ahead. I felt small, fragile, invisible, like a forgotten story trapped inside a storm. A part of me wanted to cry, but the tears refused to fall. frozen somewhere between heartbreak and disbelief. I closed my eyes and whispered a prayer for strength, for warmth, for a sign that this night would not swallow me whole. When I opened them again, I felt something inside me shift. Not hope exactly, but a quiet acceptance that I had survived far worse than this. Nights of loneliness, days of hunger, years of fighting life alone. This was just another test. Cruel one, yes, but not fatal. I picked up my suitcase and stood, shivering as the wind struck my face. Far ahead I saw the faint glow of a small convenience store. The only place open at that hour. I made my way toward it slowly, each step crunching through the snow, each breath a reminder that I still had life in me despite everything I'd lost. Inside, the warm air brushed against my frozen cheeks, and for a moment I felt human again. The cashier glanced at me with mild curiosity, perhaps wondering why an older woman with a suitcase looked so broken in the middle of the night. I bought a cup of cheap hot coffee with the few coins I had in my pocket and sat by the window, holding the cup tightly as if it were the only thing keeping me alive. Out there in the darkness was a world that no longer had a place for me. Not in my home, not in my son's heart, not in the future I had imagined. But here in this small brightly lit shop, for the first time in a long time, I realized that perhaps the world didn't need to give me a place. Perhaps I had to create one myself. The coffee warmed my throat, and a small flicker of determination sparked inside me. This wasn't the end. It hurt, yes. It burned. But endings often hide beginnings. And I wasn't ready to let this night define the rest of my life. Leaving the small convenience store behind, I stepped back into the biting cold. The warmth from the coffee fading faster than my sense of belonging. The night felt heavier now, pressing down on me with the weight of every unspoken wound I had carried for years. I kept walking along the snow-covered sidewalk, my suitcase dragging behind me, its wheels struggling against the icy ground. Each passing streetlight cast long shadows that seemed to stretch like memories, memories of a home that had never truly healed, of a son I loved more deeply than he ever understood, and of a life that had slowly chipped away at me until I became invisible in my own story. As I walked, I wondered where everything had gone wrong. Was it the day he grew older and stopped listening? Was it when he found someone new who whispered into his ears that I was old-fashioned, inconvenient, unnecessary? Or did it begin years before that? In the quiet spaces between heartbreak and hope, when I had chosen silence over confrontation just to keep the peace. The road ahead led me past neighborhoods glowing with warm lights. Families gathered around dinner tables, children laughing, people living the ordinary happiness I had once dreamed of. I paused for a moment outside one home, watching silhouettes move behind frosted windows. For a fleeting second, I imagined myself inside such a place, sitting with people who valued me, listened to me, remembered my sacrifices. But that was only a dream, and the cold reminded me of reality. My body trembled again, not from the weather, but from the ache of years of endurance suddenly collapsing like fragile glass. I continued walking until the houses gave way to quieter streets, where only the distant bark of a dog or the soft hum of cars broke the silence. Eventually, my legs could carry me no further, and I spotted a small bus shelter by the roadside. It was old, rusted, half-broken, but it offered a roof and a moment of rest. I sat down and pulled my scarf tighter around my shoulders. The cold metal seat bit into my skin, but at least I was no longer wandering without a destination. As I sat there staring at the empty road, I allowed myself to finally feel the pain I had been swallowing since I walked out the door. My eyes stung and a tear slipped down my cheek, tracing a warm path through the cold. It wasn't just about tonight, it was every night I had kept silent, every insult I had tolerated, every sacrifice that went unnoticed, every moment of love that was taken for granted. The loneliness of motherhood settled over me like a heavy blanket. But then somewhere deep inside, a small voice whispered that I had survived too much to break now. I had lived through storms far harsher than this freezing night. Storms of betrayal, storms of grief, storms of loneliness, and each time I had risen. Maybe not perfectly, maybe not proudly, but I had risen, and I would rise again. Leaning back, I closed my eyes and breathed, focusing on the quiet rhythm of my heart. I didn't know where I would go next. I had no plan, no home, no familiar warmth waiting anywhere. But I had something I hadn't felt in a long time: freedom. Painful, frightening, overwhelming, yet strangely liberating. As the wind howled through the broken gaps of the bus shelter, I opened my eyes and looked at the dark sky. Somewhere beyond the clouds, the dawn was waiting, preparing to break open the longest night of my life. And deep inside, I knew this truth. No matter how cold, no matter how lonely, this night would not last forever. A new chapter was coming, and I wasn't as powerless as I once believed. As I sat in that cold, broken bus shelter, the night pressed around me like a living thing, wrapping me in a silence I couldn't escape. Minutes stretched into hours, and the dim light of the street lamp flickered above me like it, too, was struggling to survive. My fingers were numb, my legs stiff, but what hurt most was the ache inside my chest. A kind of hollow pain that comes when the person you once gave everything to decides you no longer matter. I kept replaying his voice in my head, sharp and careless, telling me to leave, as if love was something he could discard whenever it became inconvenient. The more I thought about it, the more the truth settled deeper. I had spent so many years lowering my voice, stepping aside, keeping my heart soft so his life could stay easy. And still it wasn't enough. Not even close. The fiancé he chose over me had become the center of his decisions, the filter for his emotions, the judge of his loyalties. I wondered whether she realized how easily he had replaced the woman who raised him with the woman he merely met. The wind blew harder, rattling the thin metal sheets of the shelter. I hugged myself for warmth as a distant truck passed, its headlights sweeping over me for a moment, a brief reminder that the world kept moving, even when mine had stopped. I checked my small bag for anything useful: a half-eaten granola bar, a water bottle, a few wrinkled bills, and the photograph of him when he was 5, wearing a wool hat too big for his head, smiling at me as if I was the only person in his universe. I stared at the photo for a long time, my tears blurring the edges of his tiny face. How strange it felt, holding the memory of a child who no longer existed. Life has a way of aging the outside and hardening the inside, and somewhere between those two storms, I had lost the sweet boy who used to hug me without asking why I needed it. As the night deepened, exhaustion washed over me. I leaned against the cold metal wall, my head heavy, my thoughts drifting between past and present. I remembered nights when I stayed awake nursing him through fevers, mornings when I walked miles so he wouldn't miss school, sacrifices no one ever thanked me for. And now I was here, alone in a freezing shelter, abandoned by the very love that once gave me purpose. Yet in that moment of absolute loneliness, something inside me began to shift. A small stubborn ember glowed, refusing to die. Maybe it was the part of me that had survived every hardship life had thrown at me. Maybe it was the echo of my own mother's strength, the resilience of the women who came before me. Or maybe it was simply the realization that if I could endure this night, I could endure anything. I sat up, straightening my back despite the cold. The sky above was gradually losing its darkness, thinning into a softer shade of blue. Dawn was coming, slow, fragile, but certain. The very worst night of my life was finally beginning to break. And with it, something else broke too: the chain of fear, the hesitation, the belief that I needed anyone's approval to exist. For the first time, I felt the faint outline of a new path forming, one where I could rebuild myself, not as someone's mother, not as someone's caretaker, but as a woman with her own story, her own worth, her own beginning. As the first pale beam of sunlight touched the snow, I took a deep breath, gathered my bag, and stood up. My legs were shaky, but my spirit wasn't. I stepped out of the shelter and onto the quiet road, each crunch of snow beneath my boots sounding like a promise that no matter how broken the past was, the future still held space for me to rise. Stepping onto that quiet morning road, I felt the cold air fill my lungs with a strange mixture of pain and possibility. The sky had softened into a muted palette of pastels, pale pink, fading lavender, and a hint of gold, like the world itself was whispering that not all endings are meant to destroy us. Some are meant to rebuild us. I walked slowly at first, my legs stiff from hours spent in the freezing shelter. But each step grew steadier, stronger, as if the earth beneath me recognized the weight I carried and pushed me forward with gentle insistence. Cars passed occasionally, their headlights brushing over me, but I no longer felt invisible. For the first time in years I felt seen not by the world but by myself. Ahead, I noticed a narrow path leading toward a small coffee shop opening its doors for the morning. Light spilled warmly through the windows, and the scent of freshly brewed coffee drifted toward me like a quiet invitation. I hesitated at the entrance, unsure if I belonged anywhere anymore. But the barista smiled at me with the kind of simple kindness I hadn't felt in ages. I ordered the cheapest cup they had and sat by the window, warming my trembling hands on the paper cup. Outside, people hurried to their jobs, their families, their routines, unaware of the storm I had survived. And in that anonymity I found comfort. As I sipped the coffee, my mind drifted back to the house I had left behind, not with longing but with clarity. I realized that staying would have broken me far more deeply than leaving ever could. Love is not supposed to feel like walking on shards of glass. It is not supposed to be earned through endurance or silence. I had spent years shrinking myself so others would feel bigger. But now, in this tiny coffee shop with morning light spilling across my face, I felt myself expanding again. Slowly, painfully, beautifully. I didn't know what the future held. I didn't know where I would sleep that night or how I would rebuild a life from nothing. But I knew this much. I was done begging for space in a world I had helped build. I was done enduring disrespect dressed as duty. I was done carrying the weight of someone else's choices on my back. With the last sip of coffee, a steady calm settled over me. I reached into my bag and took out the childhood photo once more. This time I didn't cry. Instead, I traced the outline of his smile and whispered, "I forgive you, but I won't return to where I wasn't valued." Sometimes forgiveness is not for others. It's for our own freedom. And in forgiving him, I released the last chain that had kept me tied to a life that no longer served me. I stepped outside again, letting the sunlight touch my face. The warmth spread through me, gentle but real, like a reminder that healing begins with one simple step forward. I didn't have a destination, but I had a direction, away from pain toward peace. And sometimes that's enough. I lifted my suitcase, straightened my shoulders, and began walking down the long open road. Birds dipped through the morning sky, the world waking with quiet grace, and with every step, I felt the night inside me fade. I wasn't walking away defeated. I was walking away reborn. This was not the life I had planned, but it was finally the life that belonged to me. And for the first time in forever, I felt ready to live it.